Studio 360's series on creativity and science is supported in part by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation.
You're listening to a special podcast from Studio 360, stories about the art of discovery and innovation, and about the creativity at the center of the scientific process.
Jesus Christ, Doc, you disintegrated Einstein.
That's Michael J. Fox speaking to Christopher Lloyd in Back to the Future.
Calm down, Marty. I didn't disintegrate anything. You see, Einstein has just become the world's first time traveler.
Not Albert Einstein. Einstein's the name of the dog. Anyway, we're talking about the real Einstein, exactly 100 years after he gave the world the theory of relativity. A reference to Einstein in a movie about time travel, like Back to the Future, is apt because it's Einstein's discovery about the space-time continuum that allows for the possibility, the theoretical possibility, of time travel. James Glick has thought a lot about fantastical movies and stories about traveling to the past or the future because he is the author of a new book called Time Travel, A History. And he explains how one author was dreaming about time travel years before Einstein was even close to his eureka moment.
It's almost unbelievable. I assume there are people shaking their heads if I tell them that there was no such thing as time travel before the time machine in 1895. But H.G. Wells was the first, and he wasn't trying to say anything about science. He just wanted to speculate about the future of humanity. But in order to tell his story, he invented this gimmick.
Clearly, the time traveler proceeded, any real body must have extension in 4 directions. There are really 4 dimensions, 3 which we call the 3 planes of space, and a 4th, time.
That was 10 years before Einstein's first publication of the special theory of relativity. But H.G. Wells was he was kidding. It was a plausible idea. He thought he could get away with it. It was probably something he'd heard someplace. Science fiction writers and philosophers and scientists and literary fiction writers all working in parallel and thinking about time, and the influences go in every direction. The idea of time as a 4th dimension, it was around. It was an idea whose time had come.
What shall I set the way back for today?
For the year 1874.
Yes, sir, Mr. Peabody.
To put ourselves into the heads of people living 150 years ago is a challenge. Things were happening, though, to change everybody's conception of time. There are railroads and telegraph wires carrying messages at light speed, and people, for the first time, were starting to think, wow, my grandparents wouldn't recognize this life, and therefore, what does the future hold? Wells didn't need to wait for Einstein to make it official. It was sort of there. And Einstein has a kind of time travel, if you want to call it time travel, that's been proven to be real. Physicists will tell you, and it's been proven, that if you travel close to the speed of light, or you travel through a dense gravitational field, that slows your clock down. So you age more slowly than your identical twin back on Earth. There were a lot of thought experiments that involved identical twins. But then the science fiction writers got hold of the idea too, because why not?
Forward pressure sends the machine into the future. Backward pressure into the past.
You input your destination time on this keypad. This readout tells you where you're going, this one tells you where you are, this one tells you where you were.
We just set it, turn it on, open the door, and there we are. Or were, really.
Okay, the tub is obviously some kind of energy vortex, but instead of being in space, it's in a hot tub.
Well, let's be serious here. Time travel isn't actually possible scientifically, at least time travel into the past. Now, I'm sorry if that's going to disappoint people. And there is, the one famous exception where you can slow down your clock by traveling super fast near a black hole. I'm sure everybody remembers Interstellar from just a couple of years ago.
And a black hole that big has a huge gravitational pull.
The gravity on that planet will slow our clock compared to Earth's drastically.
I bet. Well, every hour we spend on that planet will be 7 years back on Earth. That's relativity, folks.
And it also added the idea of wormholes, which is considerably more speculative. I don't think Einstein dreamed of wormholes, but today's Einstein followers love wormholes. And I guess the idea is you fly in one end and you fly out the other end. Weird things can happen to your place in the space-time continuum.
So they say you want to go from here to there. But it's too far, right? Mm-hmm. So a wormhole bends space like this, so you can take a shortcut through a higher dimension.
But except for that, we're stuck with the history we have. You know, since time travel isn't actually possible, I find myself always thinking about what's the story that is really being told here, you know? 'Cause I think, for example, about Groundhog Day with Bill Murray. The cranky weatherman finds himself trapped in a cycle. He wakes up at 6 a.m. every single day and has to relive the same day over and over again.
Morning! See the groundhog?
Didn't we do this yesterday?
I don't know what you mean.
Don't mess with me, pork chop. What day is this?
It's February 2nd. Groundhog Day.
So what's that about? Well, gradually this kind of unpleasant and unhappy guy finds himself doing better and better. That expresses something that I think we all feel. You know, couldn't I do it over? That's one of the great motivators of time travel, regret. Because time is such a big part of our lives. We wonder, what if history had unfolded in a completely different way? You know, what if you changed history? Or what if this event in the future didn't happen? But if it didn't happen, how can it have happened? That's the awkward, abstract way of putting it. The common way of putting it is, what if you go back in time and you shoot your grandfather? And then you're never born, and so now you don't go back in time, and so you can't shoot your grandfather, and so now you've got a Mobius strip.
You can't kill us. We're your parents. Without us, you're never born.
Every paradox, in a way, is like the grandfather paradox. You might not recognize it because it keeps popping up in different forms. For a while, I was hoping I could find, a letter from Einstein. My dream was that he'd read The Time Machine and said, aha, but of course it's nothing like that. There's no evidence that I could find that Einstein was a sci-fi buff.
That's the author James Glick. His book, Time Travel: A History, is available now. Also in the past and the future.
Studio 360's series on creativity and science is supported in part by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, enhancing public understanding of science and technology in the modern world. More information is online at sloan.org.